Welcome to this week's piece. So this is the companion piece to last week's video. This is just a sweet little dresser. It matched with the vanity that we did. It is in a little worse condition than the vanity was, but still we can totally work with it, and nothing that we can't handle. No big repairs, nothing like that. So that was really, really great and a time saver, since we kind of needed a time saver since there's about 57 layers on these pieces. So I'm just showing you here again. This is plied. You can see all the layers of wood there. This is not antique. It is vintage, but just not anything super valuable. Get this piece going, I'm of course removing all of the hardware, taking out these drawer liners, which were very Christmassy. I found that to be amusing. So I went through and checked all the areas that needed filler. I'm using my Durham's Rock Hard Putty. This stuff is amazing. If you've watched my channel, you know that I adore it. I think it is incredible. It's great for pieces you're going to paint. I would not use this under a stain, unless I guess it was a gel stain that you could totally hide. It'd probably be fine for that, but it is not a stainable filler. It is just a great hard filler. So again, most of the drawers were where I needed the chips filled in. There was a couple spots on the sides and in the corners, but nothing too crazy. This was most of it. And then I went through and sanded the top all the way back to wood, just like we did with the vanity, because again, I'm making this stay a matching set. I don't typically keep an eye on sanding for that. It's very tedious and boring, and it's not fun to watch. It's barely fun to do. So that's why I kind of speed up through this and try and just get you through it. So the top, we went down to bare wood. The rest of it just needs a scuff sand. Scuff sand is just to prepare for paint, and that's about it. And since I was finished with sanding, I like to get my tops done first with the stains. So again, this is the same as last week's video, and that I started with the walnut and then went back over with the ash gray. And the reason I like to do the tops first is because I can get them on, I can seal them, and that way if I get any paint on them at all, it's really, really easy to wipe the paint back. So that's why I do that in that order. And again, speeding up through all of this stuff, I'm doing the fast set for my raised stencils, and I picked a pattern that I felt would kind of match the vanities. I'm of course using the same stencil as the vanities, but I mean, as far as the placement goes, I tried to pick a placement that would complement the vanity as well. And so again, I just mix this up to my desired consistency and smear it on, lift off the stencil, and it leaves a beautiful impression. I did have a question about cleaning these stencils. Typically I'll wipe them off as I go. If I have to do anything too crazy and it's really thick, I will scrape it off with the scraper, with the little putty knife that I use. I scrape off the excess and then I'll wipe it back. And then everything else, I just wait till it dries inside the container, and then I break it out and throw it in the garbage can. All right, so this is the mistake coat that we did, where I was like, oh, I'm gonna paint these white. And I'm like, why? Why would I do that? I don't know. So again, we're speeding up through this because it's not exciting. But I do think it's important for you guys to see my mistakes as I go. Not necessarily mistakes, but you know, just processes that I don't necessarily keep. Now that the stain has been set on and it's dried off, I can apply my poly. And I'm just using the Chalk Mountain Satin Poly, as I do. I usually start with a very well-loaded brush, and then I will smooth out once I get it on there. So I put a lot on initially and then smooth it out. I find that that's the easiest way for me to do it. And then just pay attention to your edges, that you're not getting drips over the side, especially on something like this where we're going to be painting the edges, and we haven't done them yet. And again, last week I told you that I use shellac to stop any bleed through. So here's where you can actually see where it's coming through. Again, this was mahogany, so it does like to bleed a lot. So anywhere where I could see pink coming through the white coat, which is actually perfect because that means I don't have to do the entire piece in shellac. It's just letting me know where I need to seal it in. And this only took that one spray on any of the spots and it was good to go. So here are the same colors, same ones we used last week. This time I'm starting from the top down. Again, I have no preference. I kind of just, whatever feels right in the moment, however I want to do it, that's how I do it. And I'm starting with the white and getting the, I'm going to say base coat because it's the first coat of the blends that we're going to do, and the first white coat doesn't count. And the second color is the pink that will then get blended into the white. So for this, I'm trying to keep in mind that this is a much larger surface area than it was on the desk. The desk is very easy because it's small. Any smaller areas that you're blending together is automatically easier than a large area you're blending together. So that's something to keep in mind, is your placement and how much blending you're actually willing to do. So if you're maybe first starting, just blend around the edges. Don't try and blend up through the center of something if that seems too overwhelming to you, or just go ahead and give it a go because you guys know it's paint. You can paint over it if you don't like it. That's always just the greatest thing about what we do. So I'm doing the same process. I'm getting the colors on, I'm kind of butting them up next to each other, and then I take my blending brush, which is just a blank brush, it doesn't have any paint on it, and I swirl the colors together into kind of a swirly mess. This is the first coat. I don't expect the first coat to be perfect. I just kind of get it, and I'm figuring out how high I want the blend to go up, how wide I want it to be, that kind of thing. And then adding in my other colors and making sure that I like the placement of the other colors. Your base coat is your playing around, messing around coat. You don't have to be too serious with it. So once I've got the third color on, you'll notice I'm blending the third color into the pink and into the white. So it works just the same. They're all very light and very easy to blend into each other. So I'm taking the same blending brush. I keep a rag on hand, either a baby wipe or just a cloth that's a little bit damp that I can keep cleaning off the brush. Even as I'm using it in the same colors, I will keep wiping it off to make sure that I'm not muddying up the colors too much. And then this is the lightest touch. When you are first swirling the two colors together, you can be a little more aggressive, but as you're going out further away from one color, you want to go so soft with the brush. Like, you know, like Bob Ross says, 2 hairs and some air. That's what I'm doing. So in the most part where the two colors are coming together, you can be a little harsher, and then as you're fading it out, you want to go so soft with the brush, just gently swirling it around. Now, this is the second coat. This is the perfection coat. I've decided where I want my colors to go and how high I want the blends to go up and all of that. So that's what you're doing in your second coat. You're perfecting it and making sure that it's exactly how you want it to end up. Now, keep in mind with a piece like this, it's only kind of going to end up the way that it is because you know we're adding so many layers to it that you kind of have to see ahead. Even though this is what it looks like now, we know that this isn't what it's going to look like later when you work in so many different layers. So I'm going a little faster through this just because we did the slow parts where you can see this is the exact same process of swirling and doing everything that way. So we're just going to speed through it. Real quick, I just wanted to show the shot here of the plywood in a dovetail drawer. I did have a question asking, is it really plywood? Because I saw that the drawers were dovetailed. Yes, it most certainly is. It is plywood and dovetailed at the same time. So now we're moving on to the wash. This is the exact same one, only I'm pulling the drawers out and doing them down for this because I have all of the raised stencils on there, and it's just easier for me to manipulate the wash when I'm not having to fight gravity at the same time. So I brush it on, I wipe it off. Keep in mind, whatever direction you are wiping with your rag, it is going to leave those streaks. So a lot of times I choose the ragging technique, which is what I'm doing around the edges, because it doesn't leave streaks, it just leaves a really cool texture. But I only want that built up texture around the outside edges because that's going to give us kind of a fade around the edges, because I want it to be darker around the edges. So I'm wiping it back, and then I go back in with the rag that is full of the wash and I dab it around the edges to darken those up and give me the look that I want. This is just a larger scaled version of what we did to the nightstand drawers. So I'm trying to keep this the same, but also to scale. Okay, so here's the fun part. I've had this sitting for a while. It was gifted to me by someone who had planned on using it, and then they decided against it, so it was sitting with them for a while. I'm pretty sure this one is discontinued. And I could tell that it was like a little bit old because it wasn't releasing the way that the new ones do. I don't use transfers a lot because I like things that I can reuse, and you can't really reuse a transfer. So I did cut off that top section because it was kind of mimicking what I already had going on the top drawer right there with the raised stencil. So I just cut that part off, and it fit perfectly with the rest of the piece and what I needed to do. Now I'm getting it lined up, and then this was just kind of the tedious process of using that stick and rubbing the transfer onto the piece. This isn't sealed yet. This is just the several layers of paint and the wash, and that's where we're at now. And then to get this around the raised stencil, instead of using the flat part of the stick, I actually used the sides and the corners of it, and I would just kind of run through in between each of the little edges of the stencil and scrubbed it on that way, and then I kind of lift it back and then use my fingers right then to press it in and make sure that it was stretching around and going inside all of the raised stencil. This worked just fine. I'm not worried about it coming off, but it was just a little bit harder to get it off the paper onto the raised stencil because it's not a flat surface that you can kind of scrub it on and stick it like the rest of the piece. So this was a little more tedious. That's fine. It looks cool. This was also a really good transfer for this because it's already kind of a distressed look anyways. So if there was like one of the little spots that didn't come off, it wasn't a huge deal. It just kind of looked like it should. And then once I got over the lip of the first drawer, I kind of just started the second so I could get it taped down. And then I could take my really sharp blade and slice off the top and then remove the top section so I'm not working with that whole sheet all at the same time. And then I just double checked to make sure everything was stuck down before I released that, and then I could carry on this entire process all the way down the front of the dresser. Now I'm going over this with a fairly stiff synthetic brush, and that's just to make sure that I get it all the way down around all of the raised stencil parts. You guys know I was just a little bit worried about that. Again, it turned out totally fine, but I just wanted to use the bristles to make sure that I could get those really, really dug in and swirled around all of them and make sure that it was really, really on there. Now to seal this piece, I'm using Chalk Mountain's copper sealing wax. Again, this is not a gilding wax, this is just a sealing wax that has been tinted with copper. So it does adjust the shades of your paint, it will lend color to it, but it isn't as bold as a gilding wax is. So you just get this on everywhere, let the paint absorb it, and then wipe it back. And then to add some more depth around the edges, you know that we already did this with the wash. We're also going to do it with some black wax as well. So I'm using the same wax brush and I'm dipping it into the black and shading around all of the edges of the entire piece. And this is another one of those steps where I feel like it starts looking worse, but you just trust it and know that it'll come together in the end. You're just doing the shading and then we're going to add extra stuff too to kind of blend everything in. I'm just putting this in the places where I think it should go and it just looks messy. Now to start making it just a little more cohesive, I'm going to be taking my silver rub and buff and this is going over all of the places where we put the dark wax. So this stuff breaks down when you use regular sealing wax with it. So you can either do rub and buff first, let it sit kind of overnight and then seal over a piece, or seal your piece with wax and then you have to wait till the wax cures and then do rub and buff over the top of it. Or in this case, what I'm doing is using the wax to my advantage and letting it kind of let the gilding wax be metallic and shiny everywhere and letting it glide and thin out over my entire piece. So there's tons of ways that you can use this, but you do have to get to know your products and what they're capable of. So that's one thing to think about when you're doing this. If I was just going to do this over the raised stencil and I only wanted it on the raised stencil portions, then I would let my piece fully cure and then do the rub and buff over the top of the wax. But we're not. We're doing everything all at once right now. So again, I'm using that tiny mop brush and I'm just dipping it in the silver rub and buff, and I'm using this also as a shader around all of the outside edges and getting it blended in, not perfectly, but closer. And now on this piece, I'm taking the rose gold gilding wax and I'm doing it throughout the center. So over the flowers, I'm really deepening those up, and the rose gold is still darker than the pink color underneath, so it's still adding a lot of depth, and again it's going to blend in with the silver and those two colors are going to come together, and then the whole piece is finally going to start looking good. Now we're going to be throwing our other colors on the raised stencil in the mix. So now I'm going through with the gold and just hitting up the center portions of this, and there'll be kind of a gradient over all of the raised stencils. So the gold is kind of the center, and then I'll do copper on the outside edges, and then on the parts that go in, I'll add a little more silver. And again, I'm not worried about it hitting the back and only staying on the raised stencil because I'm actually going to blend this in also.
Oh hi, Taryn here with Elegant Upgrades, and we've got this week's piece. So this is the companion dresser to the little vanity that we did last week. Oh, there's still more to this, so I still have to finish up the mirror and the bench that goes with the vanity. I suppose the mirror could also go with this, just depending on how it wanted to be put together and whoever purchases it. But, so I tried to keep them to where they matched and they could be sold together, but also so that they could be sold separately. And that's always something that I kind of try and think about doing when, usually sets go really well for me, but sometimes you can make more money splitting them up. That's never the case for me with nightstands, but with pieces like this, sometimes it is. So it just kind of depends. Something to think about for your area if that's what you're doing. I did want to mention, because I forgot to mention in the last video, that when I'm doing finishes like this, where it's heavily waxed, this takes longer to set up. So usually a piece that I say have done poly or just sealed it in wax and that's it, I can sell it the next day and I'm not usually too worried about it. I just always give the client a disclaimer about that. However, with these pieces, because they have so much wax on them and then also the detail wax, and I make sure that the sealing wax is very thick so that I can blend in the gilding waxes, because you guys know you can use sealing wax to kind of erase gilding waxes. So they kind of cancel each other out in that regard. But because I'm putting it on so thick, I have to give it a few days to kind of set up and cure. So it will feel like this is still very tacky, and I would never sell this to somebody right now. But it's essentially finished. So I just want to throw that out there. If you're going to do this finish, just know that you might want to wait a week, something like that. It's less than a week, but I feel like a week is safe depending on climate and temperature and all that stuff. So I just want you to, I just want you guys to have that knowledge just in case, because I would hate for you to just be like, what's going on with this? It's not, it still feels kind of, just give it a couple days and it will set up and cure and be totally fine. But it is a little malleable right after you get done doing it. So disclaimer for you as well. Okay, we're just going along. I can't wait to show you the bench and the mirror, because there's a few other techniques. The reason I'm splitting this one up and doing so many videos is because I've had a lot of you ask for slower processes of how I do things, and I just want to make sure that you guys are learning as much as you possibly can, and I can teach you as much as I can teach you, but I don't want you to get bored in one video, so I'm kind of trying to space them out and doing, each one has a little, like this one we did the transfer on, which is different than the other one, so there's still different things in each of the videos, but it's kind of the same finish. Anyways, I hope you're not getting bored. I just want to make sure that you're getting as much knowledge as I can possibly give to you in the amount of time that I have. So you guys are wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm so thankful for you. We're already almost at like 6,500. The last when I checked this morning, I can't believe it. You guys are just incredible. Also, thank you so much for the coffees. And there were like 2 different things off my wish list in this video, the ash stain and the stencil. Like, you guys are just, you're so kind to me, and I will never be able to thank you enough, so this is my best. Okay, I won't do a bunch of photos of this because, like I said, there will be a whole other video for the 2 other pieces that go with this, and then I will do a grand kind of finale. And you guys know you can always check out my Instagram if you want to see just still pictures without having to look at it in the video. And Instagram is obviously Elegant Upgrades. All right, I hope you guys have a great week, and I'll see you next time.